guys and girls, Emma again. Welcome back to the spare room. Welcome back to another part of this Patreon series. We're still making patterns. The next parts really are to make the crank web, which I think I'm going to get cast rather than machine out of solid. And a couple of reasons for that. It'd probably machine okay out of billet. But this crank pin really needs to be part of the crank web rather than be pressed in or screwed from the back or anything. So setting this up to machine this curve with this crank pin in the way, which is right in the cutting path, is going to be a little bit difficult. So the best thing is to make all this in a casting, and all we've got to do is set it up and machine the crank pin and face the front and the back and file the rest up, and that's going to be the easiest way to do that. The other piece is the head, which is basically a disc. It's got a boss on the back that goes in the cylinder, and it's got a square piece on the front that looks something like this, with a taper on the top and a flat surface underneath for the valve port. And in full size, it's got cores in here too for valves and for the ignition chamber. I'm not sure I'm going to bother with that. We'll see how we go with that. It means another core box and a bit more messing around, and an increased failure chance, which I don't like very much. Anyway, first thing, I've glued up some blocks of wood, fairly straightforward, with the grain going the same way so that you don't get tear out, and just clamped them up and sanded them up afterwards so you've got a nice flat surface. And I've just marked crossways and then clamped a piece of square stock in the middle with some glue and wait for that to dry, and then we can hold this in the 4-jaw chuck. We can set it up and we can machine from there, which is probably the best way to do that. So that's where we're at with that. We're going to let the glue dry, and we'll set one up in the chuck and we'll start some machining. So I've set this up nice and flat against the jaws here, so this runs nice and true. First job will be to take this down to a circle. We'll just set it up on the centre there, which is plenty good enough for this. It's a wooden pattern and it's got to be concentric if nothing else, and we're going to machine every face. So we've got this trued up. Next thing is to get it down to size. The drawing says, for the crank anyway, my sort of dimension, if we have a look here, the drawing says diameter unimportant, which is amazing. It says that we've got 1.5 inch offset. So I've done some calculations. I've got the proportional dividers out and I've found some of these measurements. I reckon this wants to be 3 inches diameter, because this needs to be 1.25 inch offset for 2.25 inch stroke, which is 3/4 of 3 inch. So the diameter of this radius here is 2.25 inches, the same as a stroke, plus the bit on the end. So I'm thinking 3 inches looks pretty good for that. Pull out another tool, which is our spring calipers, and set them to a fraction more for a shrinkage. We've worked that out. It's about 1/8 of an inch a foot for cast iron, so on 3 inches is 1/4 of a foot, it's about 1/16 of an inch bigger. There's also a little bit of draft on this, so we want to take that off afterwards probably, so we want to cover that as well. But this is still too big for this, so I'm going to take it down till it fits. That's our overall diameter there. Now there's a couple of ways we can do this. If we have a look, this is a more interesting part than originally you would think. This piece here sits on the outside as a balance weight, and that's embossed or raised. It's raised a little bit higher than the actual web of the crank. Now there's a circle on the top here. So a couple of ways we could do this. We could machine this at the same diameter as we are now and bore the centre of it out, and cut these pieces off and then set it up and machine this on centre to put a radius or a round edge on it around there. We could leave it as it is, or we could put this part on later and machine this to match. At this point it seems a lot less effort to set it up just the once. So what I'm going to do is cut a thin disc out of MDF. This only wants to be probably 3mm or 1/8 of an inch sticking out here. Cut it in half and stick half of it, glue half of it on the pattern and leave it overnight, and then we can machine this out later, and we're certainly starting to look like it. All we've got to do then is make a pin to fit in it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll cut the piece out and we'll glue them on and we'll see what we got. So I've marked a centre line on that. Our white balance isn't doing us any favours there. I've marked a centre line on that, and I've cut in a sort of a rough half circle there, a rainbow shape. This is across the centre and it's nice and clean cut. I'm going to glue that on there with that on the centre line, and that should give us enough to clean up with the boring bar and a tool on the outside, and hopefully some semblance of what's going to be a balance weight. So you need to put some glue on this. Put that nicely on the centre line. I'm just going to use this other half here. And the tailstock overnight to clamp that nicely. Make sure everything's good. Just check that, double check it and make sure it is on the centre line there. If we clamp that up overnight, in the morning we can machine that down, bore the centre out, and start to look at flipping him over and finishing the back and cutting the webs out, things like that. So I'm going to leave that for now. So next morning, that's glued on there nicely. We should be able to, without moving that off too much or breaking anything off, just machine the outside of it. So then we can bore the centre out, and we've got a balance crank on there in the right place and the right thickness, and everything looks good, and we don't have to mess about trying to clean this off so it looks nice and flat. So next job is to put some draft on the outside here and probably just part it off. Now there's some detail on the other side, and to be honest, it's probably quite easy to make a split pattern for this. It's not a huge part, and we might even do that, which means that it needs to be parted, and I've left enough room here to get 2 parts out of here. So we only need to put draft across to halfway through the pattern, and then if we part him off and finish the back on the just on the belt sander, I think we can machine the boss that's on the other side on the front of this piece that's left, and part that off and clean that up, and we should have 2 halves that you can reverse and put together. Then all we've got to do is cut this out and make some sort of a crank pin. So also got to pin them. Not a huge deal. Let's turn this compound slide round. I reckon about 3 degrees will do it. To be honest, that's probably a little bit much draft on that, but it'll come out of the mould nice. Might just check it for size. We're about 25 thou under 3 inches. Which is probably well within acceptable limits. It's probably pretty good. This crank pin's got to come in at about 1.1/8, and I think that's going to be nice. Fraction over 1.1/8 for shrinkage. The last job to do on this is to part it off, so we're going to have to set this somewhere near straight again. I'm not going to mess around and set it up with a sine bar. It's probably not a bad idea. But right now I'm just going to use this indication here because I know that that mark's pretty close. And we're going to need to knock it around again to put a taper on the other one. So, bit of stunt parting there. This is pretty thin and it's pretty big diameter. I'm going to clean this up with a plane on the back. We've got a nice finish to make the other part here. This has got way too much stick out. I don't know if you can see that. You probably can't. This blade's got way too much stick out for normal use. Don't try anything harder than a bit of wood or the parting tool that stuck out that far. It's a little bit dangerous. Asking for trouble. Make sure you're right on centre. So, a bit more downstreamed. I've put a couple of dowels in here and quite a lot of filler. I've machined a tapered piece here to go on for the crank pin. And I've cut these out. Worked out roughly what radius is fairly straightforward by finding something that fitted in the radius and measuring it on the drawing and then recalculating that out. It was a paint tin I used just to get the colour, the shape around there. And cut the same out there. It's a matter of waiting for this filler to dry and a couple of coats of paint, like 5 or 6, and sand back between, and that's another pattern that's ready to go. That looks like it's going to be pretty good. We'll have a look when it's finished. I've done the same to this disc here. I've cut the piece, I've machined and parted off the piece that was holding it in the chuck, and I've filled up the end grain so that there's no tear out, and gave it a good sand up. This is the cylinder head. It's got a block on top. It's not huge. And probably first thing I guess is to mark centre line. Not a difficult thing to do if you've got two squares, or if you've got a piece that slides on a combination square, which I'd really like. I haven't. What I do have is a Z-square, if I can get the right one for the job. And if we turn that round so it fits that line nice and square, we can run another line up here. And that's the centre and diagonals marked. Next job is to have a look in the huge box of pattern parts, bits of wood and stuff, and find something that's the right dimensions. We need to have a bit of a look and scale down some dimensions. Probably I'll draw a line on here, the right shape, so that we can make the bit of wood to fit the line, and that's probably the easiest way to do this. So forging ahead with this cylinder head, this is what I've got. We've got a piece of wood that's this shape on the back and that's been sanded up nicely to fit round there. There's a cylinder port here and a stud, or a valve port here in the stud for the inlet for air, and there's an exhaust port in this side still to go. There's a stud in here for the rocker, which sits on here like this. The full size one's cord here for the spark plug. I'm just going to mill that or cut a piece in there or whatever. I'm also going to just drill I've decided to just drill the ports here, set this up, and drill the valve guides and ream them and machine and bore the pieces for the valves and the seats and everything, and then bore or drill another hole in here to match. So that's probably the easy way to do that, rather than core this tiny little head. This piece of wood was put in here too. It's just a piece of wood that's cut to this size and then cut off at an angle and fitted in. And this is just two half sections of dowel that fit in here like this. It's got a bit of filler in it so far. It needs a bit more, and we've just drilled it here and here and pushed two 8mm dowels through for the spring guides on the rockers. They might still be a fraction long, I think, so we machine them off later if we need to. There's still a couple of pieces to go on here. We need a little piece that sticks up here and goes in here for the chimney support on the, if we decide that we're going to go with hot tube ignition, we're going to need that chimney support. There's a riser here for that thread for the rocker, and that's probably about it. We're getting to make those parts. So about the last project to do is to find the center of these, or the balance point, and put a thread inset in here. I've made some brass inside and outside insets. They're threaded 1/4 and should be just the thing. Matter of finding the center, and someone suggested a piece of tape on here, but these are too heavy and it just falls off the tape. It's not going to work. But we can guess pretty well. Have a look, that's hanging down a bit on this end here. It wants to go this way just a fraction. And I think we've got it pretty well close there on that hole. So it's a matter of drilling him and tapping him for the thread insert. And we're going to put him in with a bit of super glue, a bit of cyano, and finish him off nicely. And then the last job to do on this pattern, now we've got all the top coat on, is a coat of undercoat on this side to keep the moisture out. So it doesn't want to be a big thick plastic coat like this has got on the outside. It just wants a coat of undercoat to keep the moisture out. And that'll be that pattern pretty well finished. If we have a look at that, just looking pretty good. We've got our holes here for the bosses here for the water jacket. We've got a core here for, or a core print for the water jacket core. We've got another core print here for something that's going to look very similar to this in the crankcase core and the cylinder core. We've got a boss here for the camshaft, and this gear goes something like that on the inside and the camshaft, and then it's got two little brackets here and here for the push rod. We've got a surface here that we can machine for the cylinder head, and we'll need to take quite a bit out of here with a file or a grinder or something when we're done, so that we've got two lugs to fit the boss. We've got our numbers on. We've got a boss here for oil port. We've got another spigot sticking out for the bush. We've got a boss here for an oiler on the cylinder, and we've got bolt down holes. So that's looking pretty good. Next thing is to drill this and tap him, and we'll screw this in with a bit of super glue, finish him off with a bit of fire filler, and have another look at him. So that screws in there pretty nice and square. You want to get it square before we screw it in properly. Some super glue on there. And glue him in so that washes nice and flat on there, so that way we got him nice and square. I think that's not far out. It's probably a fraction light on this end, but that's kind of all it is. There's not much in it, so don't think I have any problems pulling that out like that. We're just going to fill that a little bit there, fill that hole in there that we were using. A little bit of handwork, and we'll get a roller and just finish them off with some undercoat. So the last little bits on here, a little bit of care to get these exactly in the right spot. That's a fairly difficult thing to do, I discovered. And there's a piece here which supports the chimney bracket for the hot tube ignition. And there's a bush here. I've drilled that and I've just made a little top hat sort of style bush that'll be a tap fit in that hole, and put him in with a bit of glue. And that's the bushing there for the rocker arm. It goes on there. So I let that glue dry. This wants a lot of fill around it. It wants a good sand up, and it also wants a bush in the back, the same as the two that we've done. This is what we've got here. We're going to turn this light off so we don't get too much glare. But we've got this is an oil-based undercoat on the back to keep some of the moisture out. And we've got a brass bushing in there, nice and flat and smart and neat. It's a pretty good job. We need to finish these two patterns with this yellow paint, and I've already done this one. If we have a look, we've got a nice split pattern. This still needs a bit of a sand because it's still a fraction tight as you push it together. A little bit of work there, but that's an ongoing thing with patterns. And just every time you pick it up, there's something that might need a little bit of work. And that's the crank done. And that goes pretty much fits somewhere there like that. And we'll get this looking as nice with the brass bush in it, and that'll be those parts done. So I'm going to call this video done. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Big thanks if you're watching it on Patreon. It's huge that you're enabling this project to happen. Don't discount your contribution, because it's a huge thing to me, and that's what happens. The projects like this, when I get that sort of support, and I really appreciate that. So more soon, and be kind to each other.